call, please.
Mayor, for the record, all council members are present, with exception of Councilmember Ortiz.
All righty, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Okay, public comment. This is a time set aside for public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we're going to roll right into item number 4, study session 4.1, City Council study session for discussion and possible direction on the following Indio Water Authority Long Range Finance Plan. Mr. Trejo.
Council members, my name is Raimundo Trejo. I'm the interim general manager of IWA. And today we have a presentation on our long range finance plan. And really the goal is to have some discussion and perhaps some direction from where we go with the recommendations that we have with you today. So up on the screen, you'll see our presentation. I do want to pause for a second here and introduce my management team. And that consists of Brian Kinder, who's the Director of Finance and Customer Service. We have Miguel Pena, who's our Manager of Operations and Asset Management. And we have Michelle C., who is our Manager of Planning and Conservation as well. So I'm really excited to have them here because they've helped me every step of the way to deliver what we have in front of us today. With that, we'll go ahead and begin with the presentation. So our objectives for today is to, apologies here, to present to you our 10-year financial requirements. We'll also present finance options to meet our requirements and obligations. And really it's to seek input and next steps from the council. I do want to take some time to define the purpose of our funds so that we set a baseline as to what we're studying today and what we're presenting today. In front of you is a table that has several categories of funds, and that includes an operating fund, which is the specific purpose of water quality, staffing, and operations. It is a finance plan that's based on our residential rate base. The last time that was approved was in 2013. The second one that I want to focus our attention to is the capital cash fund. The obligation for that fund is to fund our infrastructure replacement. Again, it's a rate-based fund for our existing customers. The last time that was approved was in 2013. Those are the two funds that we're going to focus in today's study session. The other two funds that we are familiar with is what we refer to as the Supplemental Water. Very specific purpose of having a funding structure to fund our water supply for growth specifically. So that's a fee-based funding plan. Last time that was updated was in 2013. And we'll get to some recommendations as to what we plan to do with the Supplemental Water Supply Fund, given that it's a little outdated and we'd like to go ahead and revisit that. The last of our funds is Developer Impact Fund, and that is specifically for infrastructure for growth. That is a fee-based fund. As you recall, just a couple of weeks ago, the council approved that fund. And so it's one of our most recently adopted and approved fee-based structures that we have for growth. So again, I'll draw your attention to the operating funds and the capital cash funds, which is specifically related to a rate structure. So with that focus, today's presentation will cover the operating and capital fund, which involves the water master plan update, our staffing plan for the next 10 years, our operations and services. Within that fund, we also fund conservation. So we'll go over the program. We'll also see the effects of conservation and whether or not we keep the current rate of conservation and how our regional projects will also rely on conservation. And the last thing I'll speak to is really an extraordinary mandate by the state. Over the last 2 years, we've been presenting to you and giving you updates on what we're doing with Chromium 6. And it appears that the state now has a schedule, a very well-defined schedule on when they plan to implement that MCL. So we'll go through some treatment cost and rate implications on what that may mean to the city of Indio and our ratepayers. So beginning with the Water Master Plan update, that was concluded just over a year and a half ago. With COVID and all, we were able to make sure that the recommendations in that master plan are still ideal and adequate for our 10-year forecast, and they are. So the capital improvement consists of about $32 million of infrastructure. That specifically is not for growth, but rather our existing customer base. I've highlighted some of the most visible projects. That includes the Plant 2 booster pump station replacement. That in fact is our oldest facility. And it really is time to replace that facility because we have a consultant team that's reviewed it and confirmed that it's reached its useful life, and it is time to now replace that. That is included as part of the 32 million. I've announced a couple of times that we have a Miles pipeline project that will be breaking ground in January. And we also have a Westward Ho pipeline that is crossing one of the stormwater channels. And then a 2019 event, it almost ruptured because it was uncovered by that rare event that we had. So those are priorities. The well rehab program, we've been presenting that to you as well, to prolong the life of our wells. And the fire hydrant replacement program to ensure the safety of our residents and making sure that we upgrade hydrants that are deficient with respect to our standards. Miguel's been very involved with our asset management system in replacement, and that involves the meters, the valves, and all the appurtenances that make our system reliable. And last, we also included a backup generator line item in our CIP that would back up all our production facilities. For the most part, it's wells. And we want to make sure that we have that protection, given that we're in a really high seismic zone here in the valley. I want to point out that the master plan update also includes, again, the 32 million pipeline replacement. And we are working closely with Tim's group in collaboration with their public works projects. Specifically, Avenue 44 Bridge Replacement Project has 2 of IWA pipelines in there. It's been great working with Juan and his team so that we can fund the respective area that affects IWA. So that's a great collaboration. The second one, recently Tim announced that Public Works was successful in getting grant funding for the downtown area stormwater projects. Again, collaborating with Juan, collaborating with Tim, we have a line item in our CIP that will address the downtown area, meaning that if there's any streets that are cut, we have a plan in place to design and put pipelines in the streets that Tim and Juan are working on so that we ensure that we don't come back and cut those streets in the future. So that is part of our long-term pipeline replacement program. And again, the focus is in downtown Indio. The last item that I'll share with you is what we refer to as alley service relocations. Again, specifically in the downtown area. So anytime we cut a street, put a new pipe in there, we take the opportunity to relocate the services from alleys over onto the street. So we do need a budget item to do that and complete that work. The point here is that we have a comprehensive CIP, and that's defining what our needs are as part of this long-range finance plan. Next, again, the team that's here today took a really close look at our staffing plan, and our annual budget of 6.1 million includes overhead, all the medical, all the different benefits. So that includes administration, finance, the engineering, production, and water distribution. That, again, is part of the finance plan that we have. And all of these items that I'm sharing with you today is part of a long-range financial model that will yield some results and define some of the rate implications it has on our ratepayers. Next item is operations and services. Our annual budget for that is about $14.9 million. That's the services and charges, supplies, fixed assets, internal service charges, existing debt service of some of the past bond financing that we have in place, equipment replacement. It also includes our power requirements. So any payments to IID with respect to the power requirements, that's included in this line item as well. And last but not least, it's our conservation program. That is part of this rate structure, long-term rate structure plan. And we have approximately $550,000 a year budgeted in our 10-year plan. And what that includes is what we all are familiar with. It's the turf removal rebate program, the water use efficiency device rebates, our education and outreach, which is a line item that we can definitely include demonstration gardens and any other beneficial projects that will beautify the city as well. So that's really an outreach and educational opportunity. So we do have that in our budget moving forward. And then the board policies and conservation is also part of our conservation program. And what we mean by the board policies is back in July, the council adopted what's referred to as the water shortage contingency plan. And that involves 6 very dramatic action plans in the event of a severe drought. And what I mean by that is the first action, level 1, is voluntary conservation. But as we get into a stage of difficulty statewide or locally, those different levels, which have to be approved by the council each and every time we go from level 2 to 6, are as drastic as not allowing any new meters to be installed in our city. That's how severe this plan captures the wide range of actions that the council may apply. We're working on a regional level to implement this, and I bring this up because that is part of our conservation strategy. So as we develop new ideas, well, how do we treat pools when we're at a severe drought stage? Well, this plan defines what that action is. So over the coming weeks and months, we'll share that information with you, depending on how the hydrologies on the state level develop. And what I mean by that, there are times where we get a lot of rain, and then that whole executive order from the governor becomes to be a little lighter. But if it's not, we do have an action plan in place that we'll bring to your attention and provide more information on that as we proceed. So how does that conservation plan, what does that look like over the last 10 years? Has it been beneficial? So in front of you is a chart that shows us our annual production here, just specifically to IWA. So if we point our attention to this bar chart, it's the annual acre feet that we produce from the basin. In 2009, you'll see that we were pumping more than 23,000 acre feet. But because of the very robust conservation program, you can see how the annual pumping actually was reduced each and every year. Huge benefit to the basin, to Indio specifically, that conservation is one of our specific programs in place. And you'll see that as time goes by, there's been growth in Indio, specifically from 2009 to 2020, yet our production for a greater population has still been less than 2009. So the proof is that conservation is working, and it's very beneficial to us to continue that program. One last thing I'll point to is in 2010, the gallons per capita per day based on the urban water management plan specific to Indio Water Authority was 325 gallons per capita per day. That's the outdoor use of irrigation together with the indoor use and everything that one person would use on any given day. And it's typically a little higher than the normal, but in 2020, the number has gone down dramatically, down to 225 gallons per capita per day. Lots of room for improvement. And we believe that if we continue with the current rate of conservation, we'll see that number go down further and further. So at the regional level, our conservation program plays a great role. And so what I wanted to do is pause and share with you one of the draft slides that's part of our Indio Sub-Basin Sustainable Groundwater Management Act obligation, which is to adopt an alternative plan update. I'll come back to you on the 15th for an actual presentation and public hearing for the adoption of this plan. Now, taking a step back and understanding, well, what does that mean to Indio Water Authority? Well, the Sigma alternative plan has a huge component of conservation. So we're part of that process. We've got, if you look at the chart, beginning in January of 2010, that's around the time that regional replenishment came on board with some of the regional facilities. At the same time, there was a strong push to have golf courses irrigated with canal water. And right around the same time, a lot of the agencies began to adopt tiered rates, or what we refer to as some budget tiered rates or fixed tier rates. And what that has done to our basin, now this particular slide was taken from one of the wells that is in our service area. It's a monitoring well that's used as part of this plan. And over the next couple of years, we'll be drilling additional monitoring wells strategic to, or rather wherever Indio believes we should be monitoring, to provide us a meter or a gauge as to whether or not these projects are working. So down at the bottom, I placed conservation. Conservation is huge. It's one of the biggest reasons why we are now seeing leveling of the groundwater basin is not only the replenishment, return flows, but conservation is key to that. Now, various colored charts or the lines that you see here represent that if we continue to proceed with conservation, regional replenishment, canal irrigation, there are different scenarios that show that our levels will continue to rise over time. The lowest of the two, the blue and the light blue, represent what's called a baseline, meaning that if there's no new projects, no more replenishment, no additional conservation, no additional beneficial use of canal water, then we will begin to see not only leveling, the darker blue, the leveling line, but over 30, 40, 50 years, it may begin to decline. The light blue represents climate change. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that we are big proponents of conservation, that if we continue to do this, there is a plan in place, a model in place that shows that we have tremendous amount of water opportunities, sustainable opportunities, and hence it is part of our portfolio. I didn't mean to belabor the slide, but I thought it was important for us to understand that the things that we're doing today there's some long-term benefits as well. Now, all the other lines above the blue and the light blue, what that means is that, for example, if we begin to do some level of EBRA, whether it's direct injection, irrigation use, if we continue to, at the regional level, use recycled water to expand those plants, whether it's CWA, DWA, Coachella Valley Water District, the representative effects are the yellow, the greens, and up to that red line. That's what's going to happen according to the model, and all 6 agencies collaborating in this effort, is that we will see a tremendous rise in our groundwater storage. Not to say that there's any risk with canal water going away with some level of extreme drought and so forth, but there is again, climate change component of the model that shows some level of reductions in canal water, but on the long term, history has shown us that over time, there are some hydrologies that will experience that will bring us back up to some level of normality. And to further show that conservation, local replenishment, and all the projects we're working on, these 2 wells are actually IWA wells that we produce. Since 2008, we've been monitoring well levels. We actually use a sounding device and where we shoot the device down the wells when it's at static, meaning that we stop pumping and we get that bounce back. So there's been a lot of different tools that have been used over time, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. So I'm going to start working with Miguel closer to really make sure we have SOPs in place, that this data is accurate, and it's showing us really what's happening in the basin. And what's happening is we're seeing the basin levels going up. So since 2008 to 2021, we're showing that the trend lines are going up, and these 2 are really 2 of our largest producing wells. So we're excited that this is working. I'll pause right there for a second. And this is all leading up to how and why we've prepared a long-range finance plan that takes into account not only what we need to replace, but to some extent, how we're doing with our supply.
What is allowing the groundwater condition to improve?
I'll come back to the slide. And over time, what I've tried to demonstrate here is the dark line is our groundwater levels going down because we're producing water. And each of those elements, that little blue arrow with replenishment, golf courses using canal water means we're pumping less water from the basin, but rather using canal water coming in. So there's a reduction in basin usage. When we have a tiered or budget rate, we've demonstrated through our production, that's being produced less and less. And more specifically, there's been a tremendous amount of canal water replenished into the basin. And in 2010, for example, the levee plant came on. Now, what we didn't see immediately in 2010, it was the benefits to IWA. And what I mean by that, it does take time for that water to travel. So a combination of extreme conservation, which reduces our pumping, and then introducing not only canal water, but any return flows into the basin, that's allowing us to actually recover basin levels. And really, that's the basis of this long-term sustainable plan. Let's continue to replenish water. Let's continue conservation. Let's look for opportunities to use VSD water or other recycled water for irrigation purposes. As much as we want to continue to look at injection, we still want to make sure that we exhaust any other possible cost-effective measures to use that water because it's working. That was a long-winded way of answering your question, but it is a combination of all these elements that's helping the groundwater basin rise. It's not just one. So I'll pause here because this is really one of the first of two slides that demonstrates the health of our current rate structure and the health of our financial standing at IWA. So this chart here is the output of our long-range finance model. It's a model that all of management has had an opportunity over the last 2 months to really dig down and deep, confirm the numbers. What are the line items? Brian's been making sure that it's consistent with their staffing plan. Miguel's making sure that there's enough money in there for power. What are the power costs? It's also balanced with an index 3%. In other words, whatever today's present value at, on average, we're increasing that 3% each and every single year for that 10-year window. The other item that we don't see here is that we've taken aside $9.4 million as part of our emergency and operating reserves. And the reason we did that, we're in a very high seismic zone area. We're not a typical agency that can just rely on a smaller reserve. There are some significant impacts that may occur. So we've taken that aside, and it's not part of this graphic. So let me start with 2021. The green line represents our reserve balance outside of that 9.4 million that we have in the event of an emergency. So if we begin to implement our CIP as I presented to you, together with the conservation plan, together with our staffing plan, our operations and services, we'll begin drafting those reserves. In addition to that, we have our annual revenue that we collect from our residents. And over time, we have new accounts, we have more and more residents, more and more customers. All of that's taken into account with this long-range finance plan. So year after year, you will start seeing that green line drop. Now, let me define what the blue and the red lines mean. Now, typically the 9.4 million that I mentioned represents what that blue and red line would be. But again, we're in a seismic area. Let's put that aside. And beginning with the red line, in the event that we had a large catastrophe, at a minimum, we'd like to have 25% of our annual operating costs in the bank, so to speak. So this is an industry practice. We have 4 months or 3 months worth of expenditures in the event that we can't collect any more revenues from our residents. So that is a trigger for us to make sure that we're above that line. It's really a health check for us. Let's make sure that we don't draft our reserves down below that line. In addition to that, we have a blue line, and that represents an additional, not only the 25% of our O&M costs, but it also includes 1 year of capital improvement expenditure. So if we're in the middle of a contract with contractors, we can at least complete 1 year's worth of work. The other thing I should mention that the red line also includes any debt service for the entire year. So our obligations financially are in good standing. So either year after year, as we start drafting the CIP, what the goal is to see when is that green line going to cross the higher of the two, because we want to be conservative. When it touches the blue line, it indicates to me, to the team, that we need a rate increase to keep us whole, to keep us balanced. So given that in the last, since 2014 through 2018, the city underwent a 5% rate increase, or sorry, an 8% rate increase for 5 years. Tremendous amount of revenue was collected. Some of the projects were not implemented. And the reason why you're seeing reserves and an annual accumulation of revenues was because of those rate increases. Now is a great opportunity to implement the projects and continue to implement projects as I've defined right now, and see what that does over the next 10 years. So year after year, we see that we are drafting our reserve balance, that we are using the revenues we're collecting, and we're implementing the downtown pipelines, the alley relocations, the conservation. We're still keeping up with our staffing levels. And what this shows is that by 2031, 2032, we actually have enough reserves and we have a strong revenue stream that we have a balanced budget. I can't believe I just said that because it's very difficult to say. Over 10 years, we've demonstrated that we have a balanced budget. Now, I say that today because we can come back to you next year and have the same presentation. Let's make sure we check our temperatures, make sure that we implemented the projects we said we would, and continue to exercise this model and continue to come back to you for feedback. So I'm going to pause right there because this is the first of two major elements that I want to present to you. Number one, my presentation would end here if we didn't have Chromium-6 to talk about.
Yeah.
So I will pause to have some dialogue, and this is a study session, so I encourage any questions you may have for me.
Any questions either here from council? No?
So after year 10, given the trajectory of the graph, will we be in a budget deficit?
No, the graph illustrates that we're not in a budget deficit, and I say that because that is the purpose of the graph. Is if the green line was falling below the blue or the red, that would indicate that we would be getting close to a budget deficit. The fact that we're maintaining it above the blue line shows that we're still in good standing.
Right, but beyond 2031 and 32, given the trajectory over the 10 years prior, we would be in a budget deficit going into 2033.
Without a rate increase.
Without a rate increase, that's a possibility. However, one of the things I do need to state is that in the event that we do not implement some of those projects, in the event that we have staffing vacancies, that green line is probably going to rise over time. So the real effort here is that we demonstrate that a minimum over a long 10-year period, we have a balanced budget. But to your point, I wanted to make sure that that last increment was a flat line increment. And what I mean by that is that it's not dropping, because if you do extend it over the next 5-10 years, that rate, that drop, I'll say the angle of that last curve will indicate where we're headed. The fact that it's flat and the fact that at the end of the 10 years, we've completed all the CIP, we do have a balanced budget. We just cannot implement additional CIP without coming back to you. Now, the goal is to come back to you every single year, not just today.
Well, we never want to hold back on CIP projects if the funding's there, but we are cautious about rate increases to make sure that we ramp them up back them up enough so that we don't end up in a deficit and then try to do a rate increase. So in year 2028 is when we would consider phasing in a rate increase.
I think that's very wise,
Yeah.
because you're avoiding the spike of an increase and try
We
to
never
take.
want to get there. And that's the same thing CBWD does. You know, we may complain about the increases, but they're actually looking to make sure that we never fall.
That's actually the feedback we're looking for. And the reason I say that is I wanted, at least as a team, we talked about it over and over. Should we show a rate increase? Well, let's start by showing what it really looks like without that rate increase. Let's show them the true baseline. And this is the true baseline. Now, suggesting a rate increase that's many years out, absolutely. We can put that in the model and we can show and demonstrate what that looks like. But yes, it's exactly what we're looking for. Do we want to come down to that blue line or not? And can we come back to you with an alternative or a scenario that demonstrates what a 2% would look like for the last 3 years of that 10-year? What does that look like and what does that fund?
Well, personally, I won't be here in 2028, but I think that's the year that you should start phasing in a rate increase.
Just jumping in and complimenting the council, the board. This is great news to think that we're in a position now with the rate increases of the past. There may not be, except for the state mandates that Ray will talk about in a second. This is great news, and we're in great financial shape. The state mandates might cause and require a rate increase, but right now, unless you wanted to add CIP projects, boy, for 10 years to not have to have a rate increase or gradually phase it in, that's great news.
Great feedback, because we did contemplate whether or not we want to have that a gap between the blue line and the green line. But really it's really to the council's recommendations and direction to give us that, and definitely come back with showing you what it looks like. Before we do that, again, I'll take the notes. Any other questions? Because we will get into the rate impacts that chromium-6 may have for our city.
Of course. Yes, sir.
Ray, I concur with Councilmember Mead. We don't need to have the big spikes, but if you're going to do the reserves and what you're looking for, is that including, I mean, obviously not chromium-6, is that recurring replacement, some of the major pipes, some of the other stuff we had, like we did expansion over off of the canal area to be able to loop the system. Is there anything like that? Are we taking in everything? Or are we just taking in new opportunity projects? Or are we talking about long-term maintenance too?
Yeah, so it takes all of the above into
Okay.
consideration. The 32 million of CIP, which includes Miles Pipeline, to your point, the looping, replacement of the plant. And based on present value, we were escalating those dollars by 3%. And given everything, we put everything in the pot, so to speak, confirmed by management, because they have an obligation to oversee operations, staffing. And to our surprise, this is what we saw. And what we actually saw was a little bit of a gap initially. And it was an opportunity for Miguel and I to sit down, look, we don't have backup generators in our system. Let's put it in there. Let's include it. The gap demonstrates we still have funding. Let's add that in there, because that's a critical element to have a reliable system. So what that did is it dropped the line even further.
Okay.
But what we did as staff is, let's make sure we have one opportunity to put it all in the spreadsheet in a long-range finance plan. But to your point, we actually added projects and justify those projects as reliability.
Including replacement and replenishments too?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, rehab program is year after year. We have it as a programmatic for the next 10 years.
Okay. And then one last thing, if we are going to do rate increases, which I'm not against it, especially if we need it, we can justify them, obviously. We do need to look at the tiered rates and the way we do it, because what I've heard from a lot of people and individuals, especially in some of the gated communities, like I live in, the 55 and older, who have set incomes and are single, a lot of them are single, their budgets, they're already in tier 3 and they haven't done anything different. We changed our tiers and went into it. And as you have senior citizens or other individuals that have set budgets, when they see that and they're cutting back on their water, and they're already in tier 3, and you start increasing that, and they're like, I'm taking a shower. I'm only washing my clothes so often. I'm not doing anything different. Now I'm already being penalized. I think we really need to look at that if you're going to start raising rates, because it's not the first rate that kills you. It's the second and third one. And like I said, a lot of these people that I've talked to, some have had mistakes and stuff like that, but a lot of them are just doing their day-to-day stuff. And our budget amount is not enough for them not to go in the other tiers, live in a common, normal existence in life. In other words, not being excessive, not having a pool, not doing this. So I think we need to look at that if we're going to do that, to make sure that we're not hitting families or senior citizens or other people that can't afford it with high rate bills that now, help us, but hurt them. So.
Absolutely. And I may, if I may respond to that, is that we have separated our financial needs, meaning revenue needs, from a tiered rate structure, both complex subject matters. However, having a tiered rate structure should not yield additional revenue. The goal is to still have the same revenue. As how we allocate those responsibilities among, or I should say responsibilities, obligations among the ratepayers. That will be a subject matter that this team will bring back to you, possibly March. We're hoping to do a little earlier, but there's a lot of homework ahead of us, meaning that there's other agencies that are now moving from budget rates. Some are not. They're sticking to their budget rates. We want to make sure that we have a true story to tell you. Good case in points from CVWD, Western Municipal got sued for some reason, how they were able to successfully defend their case. So we want to make sure we take the time and deliberately bring that information back to you. We're thinking about March. To your point again, is that a little separate from today's discussion, meaning that reallocating rate structures should not yield a bottom line additional revenue. This increase applies to our entire baseline. How we allocate those tiers is really what we'll come back to you. And the consultants are actually on our Zoom right now, helping us here. They've got some good experiences working with Beverly Hills, working with the city of LA. So we'll work together to bring back a presentation. And it really is going to share some background, industry practices, and where we're headed as an industry, specifically in the state of California with this whole drought.
Mhm. Go right ahead.
I like to, I know we have some programs, that help our seniors and folks who are having a hard time with with conservation and other things. I like to highlight that Councilmember Miller brought up a good point, and folks do come to us, with fixed incomes, and it's just not water rates. There's power, there's to worry about. So when we have these programs and we have resource fairs, it's always great that IWA comes and participates. I know in the past we've given out free shower heads and really educated our public how to conserve. So really like to highlight that as we move forward as well to assist folks, who are on those fixed incomes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've done working closely with the city manager is internally with staff, realign some of our obligations, meaning that I've tried to free up Michelle a little bit more. Brian Kinder is now taking on the obligation of customer service so that we can clear the pathway. It takes a lot of work, and there's a regional collaboration with other agencies. We're competing for the same grant dollars. So Michelle's new obligation and a lot of her support is going to be specific to grant funding as it relates to disadvantaged communities. In fact, we have one in front of us. We're looking at applying for about $150,000 just for disadvantaged areas of our city. Doesn't mean it's citywide. And how do we help them? Because a lot of folks may not be able to afford to replace their turf. It's just not enough money, especially if they're disadvantaged. How do we make it so that it's scalable, turnkey, and help them? Right to your point.
Is there a current mechanism for some of these folks, who have obviously, as Councilmember Miller said, there's no leaks, right? You check, you go through all the different things to ensure there isn't a leak, like your toilet, whatever. And yet they're still in that high tier. Is there a mechanism for that to be revisited? Because I guess I'm a little conscious of, now versus a future look. And having said that, I think I agree. The consensus here is none of us want to come out with a huge rate increase, but that small, smooth, barely noticeable increase impacts people less, except for those folks on fixed income. I think that's probably the biggest concern.
Yeah, so the question is if we have any program to come back and help assess leaks and help folks in determining that so that they stay within the lower tiers. We may not have it at the residential level. What we do have it is at the landscape level, meaning that we do have audits that have been conducted. Again, one of the reasons why we've cleared the path for Michelle, as well as myself, is to have that focus, understand if we can continue to not only have it at the large landscape level when there's leaks, there's a lot of water savings there. So how do we assess to see we can get it at the residential level? One of the ways that we're doing that is education. And Michelle has now prepared some flyers. And our goal is that every single month we have a flyer that talks to those points, demonstrates pictures, what happens when your toilet leaks. Hey, click on this link and we'll help you. Maybe we can put a YouTube together to help share that information. But on all the mailings, we're really going to have a more robust approach to that opportunity to share that, more picture oriented, because it really has to be a visual that helps attract their attention.
And I was really referencing the folks, the single property owners that, or not even a property owner, the single older elderly like Glenn. I live in a 55 and older, and there are some seniors that are just in the have a minimum water usage, and yet they fall into the higher tier, and it's a challenge for them. And you know, what do you? Yeah, calling IWA at this point in time doesn't help them. And you know, I guess that's really my question is there any mechanism for someone that is in this predicament for IWA to take another look at their home and their water usage and their appropriate tier?
Yeah, I don't want to leave my staff out in answering that question because we may even have some, you know, we've got experience taking calls, hey, there's a leak. So let me pause for a second. I don't know, Miguel, you have anything to share with that with respect to any phone calls that we get?
It's not gonna end up. All right, for the record, I'm Brian Kennedy, the finance manager of the IWA. You know, we actually have a mechanism in place for water bills. You know, when they're high bills, you know, we get a warning whenever we do the billing. And like a lot of these customers are called about, you know, if they're at a very high level of water usage, that's, you know, way above normal. So there is something that we do put in place. And then also all of our customers can go on the web portal and look at their hourly, you know, water usage. And if there's spikes in it, you know, we can do things to help them, you know, find the leak or, you know, whatever is needed.
Okay.
I will add to that, though. This is the input that we need, the feedback. And the reason I say that is if there's opportunities, and in the past, we've worked with the school districts, have that outreach, but perhaps we can come back to you with some additional elements of our outreach program as part of the conservation outreach and education to maybe visit some of these HOAs, some of these communities that need that education, more of a one-on-one, and make that part of our portfolio of conservation. Again, good input, and we'll seek to see what we can do with that.
Oscar has his hand raised.
Yeah, you know, it's good to see the water basin levels going up and filling back up, but I also know that a majority of that is because of the water replenishment that we do with canal water, right? And now that we're seeing a lot of water shortages from the Colorado River, and we've seen some restrictions on other states already from that water supply. What do we see coming forward in the next 10 years, and how can we prepare for any shortages that come from that water shortage from the Colorado River?
Yeah, great question, great observation. It's a common conversation that we have with the region. I can refer to a slide here that addresses that on a short term. And let's point, if we can just look at the light green line, meaning the 1, 2, 3, 4th line from the bottom, simulates what we refer to as climate change. And now that simulation is actually stating that we have a reduced canal water. But in addition to that, we have increased conservation. So in the event that we have a reduction in a imported water supply, what we'll be exercising is those 6 levels that I talked about that we approved back in July. Those are really extreme, harsh levels that we don't want to get to. We want to try to avoid them to the extent possible. But to attempt to answer your question is that we have a mechanism in place that requires council resolution and adoption to go from level 2, 3, 4, very harsh and extreme, to the point we may actually not allow any outdoor water use on the extreme side of that program. It may last for weeks, may last for months, even last for a couple of years, up until we get that rain and hydrology to bring us back to some level of normality. That's the plan in place. Number one, a long-term regional model that shows and demonstrates on the near term reductions in Colorado. And second, together with conservation, together with the 6th action plan, we have a plan in place. I'll pause there just to make sure that I fully address your question here.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, I think on my end, I think we should start getting ready for that earlier than later. But I do understand, you know, the different tiers that we have, and that we have those plans in place. But I think with the turf removal program is a great one, right? We have so much water that we lose to our landscaping. And if we can improve homes while we reduce our water use, if we can find funding for that, working with CVWD or working with other organizations, I think that would be great. But I know we are doing a great job on our conservation side, but I think we still need to keep going, right? Keep going and improving and make sure that we're ready for those shortages that are most likely to come, right? Thank you.
Okay, I know where you've taken a lot of time with us and I'm conscious of your time, so go right ahead.
That was the easy part of the conversation. Now we'll get into chromium-6.
Okay,
And just before we do that, the initial recommendation, of course, subject to coming back to you with direction, is that we have a balanced 10-year budget, subject to perhaps some rate increases towards the end to get us in some good standing long-term. We can continue to implement the CIP on a short-term basis, conservation, meaning next 5-6 years. We're still on track. We demonstrated that through the finance plan. And that we can provide a mid-year update and a year-over-year budget update to share that same graphic and see what it looks like each year. Now, this is not normal. A chromium-6 maximum contaminant level is an extraordinary state mandate. It happened to us by way of background. Back in 2015, the state set an MCL of what's called 10 parts per billion, and it affected 13 of our 20 wells, which of 3 of those wells, we were able to build a treatment facility. We've been operating it since then, so we have good experience in addressing these level of contaminants. But in 2017, the MCL was invalidated by the Superior Court. And really the basis was that a lot of agencies said that there was no economic feasibility study conducted to anticipate the financial effects on water agencies of this MCL. So since then, just last month, we all received a letter, meaning the water agencies, from the State Water Board that they are now considering 17 possible maximum contaminant levels. They are as follows. There's either 1 through 15 or 20 or 25 parts per billion. That's the 17 potential actions that they can take. One of those 17. They have a comment period through December 6, 2021. Now, what they announced was really an environmental impact report on how the potential treatment of these different levels, what that treatment plant, what impact it may have on the environment. So our comments are not towards the MCL, but rather the EIR that the state plans to prepare so that all the agencies can use that programmatic EIR for ease of implementing the projects. Adoption is expected to occur summer of next year. So what does that mean to our residents potentially? Here is a table that I prepared of probable treatment costs. Now we talked about the MCL, the maximum contaminant level. I broke this down relative to the effect on our existing wells, all 20 of them. We have the treatment capital costs, we have the annual operations cost, and I have additional wells treated because we already have 3 wells that are being treated that we can exercise today and meet that wide range of MCL. So let's walk through this slide and show that at the lowest level, anywhere from 1 through 7 parts per billion, an additional 17, meaning all our wells would be affected. And down below, I have a note that says cost estimates is based on the 2020 State Water Board treatment cost estimate table that they prepared. We utilize those numbers, and what we anticipate is the treatment capital for the worst case is $85 million for our residents. The annual cost for operating this plant is really the trucking of the waste product that's produced. It's an extremely expensive process to truck that waste product. We have a lot of experience. It's also staffing. Any additional staffing on a year-over-year to attend to all 17 wells will add some staffing challenges to us, $8 million a year. In the event that they have the same MCL as they did last time, 2015, we wanted to demonstrate what that looks like. That's about $35 million in capital, $4 million a year in operations, and it would affect an additional 7 wells, maybe more. We'll have to evaluate what the water quality is of those wells. We're hoping that the state will consider an MCL closer to 12 to 15, and if not 20 to 25. And that's the goal. And there's hope that that could happen. A lot of agencies are getting together at the regional level. I've been in talks with CVWD. They're going to see the same effects, all the regional folks, and making sure that our voice is consistent, that we have the same message. And the message is, first of all, why so extreme? Because the state, or I should say the federal level, is 50. They're going way below the federal level. And our thoughts are that we should fall somewhere that's reasonable. And that's really going to be our message. We'll come back to you when it's the appropriate time to actually comment with respect to the MCL. And we anticipate, again, summer of 2022 will be when they adopt that MCL. Or it should happen before that when we comment. But the message is clear, very expensive. What does that mean to our residents? Now, we're a little familiar with the slide now. Now we can see that there's an extra line in there. The line is that dotted green line. In the prior slide, it was hiding underneath the green line because there was no rate increases. But let's get started with this. I assume the mid-range of the same MCL as back in 2015, just to illustrate what the impacts might be. 35 million is the capital, 5.5% rate increase over 4 years is the net impact to our residents. This includes all the CIP that we talked about, includes all the numbers that we demonstrated in the first chart. And what we see is if we do nothing, the dotted green line represents our reserves, and it will be exhausted by 2027, 28. With respect to rate increases, we began to demonstrate rate increase requirements as early as next year. And in our model, when we put in a 5.5%, we could put in 2%, then 3%, then 5%. And the chart continues to demonstrate what the effects are on that. What I tried and attempt, at least for illustration purposes, is to have a fixed number for a number of years so that it's easier to anticipate and process. And what I mean by that is 5.5% for 4 years on a 10-year basis would keep us above the green line. That assumes that we would bond fund for the capital because we need to invest that money right away. Now, typically the state would give us 5 years to implement these projects. That's what history tells us. And we'll at least push for that, if not 10 years. It also assumes no grant funding. There's an opportunity here that the state may offer grant. So severe, so extreme of an MCL, typically they'll have grant funding. But in this illustration, we did include it. We did not. And that's because we want to see what those effects are. Let's be realistic of how extreme this could be. And that really is the intent of this slide. And again, it does not include the 9.4 million in emergency and operating reserves. And what I'll do is I'll pause right there for some comment.
So that just blew your budget,
Yeah.
your balanced budget.
Always.
Ray, is this assuming which parts per billion comes into play?
It assumes the mid-range from the prior slide, and I'll turn to that right now. It assumes the 8 to 11, which is the 35 million in capital. In addition to that, 4 million a year in operations. And I thought I'd choose the middle. Obviously, I can come back with the 85 million, 8 a year, but I wanted to start with at least what we demonstrated in history, which is our last MCL as a starting point. But if it does get worse than that, at least we understand what the impact is. And
Gotcha.
the reason I broke this up into two different charts, number one, balanced budget, meaning that there's no rate impacts was the intent here. And if we have to go with a 218, it's an easier message to our residents to say, this is state driven holistically. This is because of the mandate. Has nothing to do with our staffing, our CIP, but rather clearly it's an effect that, as you stated, it does affect our budget tremendously, and it requires a rate increase.
Got it. Thank you.
Apologize for the length of the presentation. I just want to make sure we have the right information in front of you for decisions. Recommendations is we continue to monitor, present finance options once it's adopted. So we'll be coming to you frequently as soon as we hear anything on the MCL. So in summary, I started the presentation by stating that we're focused on the operating and capital long-range finance plan. We're also going to talk about the state mandate. Those two are part of this long-range finance plan specifically. Recommendations for operations capital, 10-year plan, no rate increase initially. Of course, we've heard some input here, so we'll come back and make sure that we work with that input. For the state mandate, we talked about reporting back early next year. And our preliminary analysis shows that there's at least a 5.5% rate increase for 4 years if they decide to go mid-range. And with respect to supplemental water supply fee, really the conversation on EVRA, it is a growth project or it is a project that's part of our portfolio. We'd have to go back and update the 2013 study. Let's look at that fee and come back to you with more information on that. EVRA, the board at EVRA has asked us to continue some feasibility studies. We really need to get our hands around the studies before we propose any viable projects. The fact that there's a potential that chromium-6 may consume our bonding capacity in its entirety, we want to make sure that we take one bite size at a time, meaning our state obligation. Let's make sure we have that capacity on bonding, and then come back to you after that MCL is set to say, how much more bonding capacity do we have and what are the alternatives for an EVRA project? And the last one is the developer impact fee, again, adopted just recently. So that's the summary of our discussions, and I'll open it up to any final comments or direction from the board.
Okay, running a few minutes late. Any final comments other than what an exceptional job of putting all this together and giving us the scenarios, things to consider? Any comments? I think we're good. And we look forward, I look forward to understanding what those ranges come back in mid 2022.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Okay, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, members of the audience, this meeting is now adjourned and I'd like to open the closed session. It is 3 minutes after 4 p.m. with roll call, please.
Yes, Mayor, for the record, all council members are present.
Terrific. Public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments?
No comments, Mayor.
All right, I'd like to adjourn a closed session to consider, and I'm trying to remember, we don't have to read all of these items, 3.1 through 3.4. That's all I need to
As listed
say?
on the agenda. Yeah.
Okay, as listed on the agenda, we shall now adjourn to closed session.